It is weird that you're framing this as a men thing. And you're right, it is totally weird. It is just so strange. A complete mystery as to why anyone thinks this is a gendered issue. There's no good reason to think that this is almost entirely perpetrated by men.
And everybody's out of town anyway, so this one presenter rang me up and he said, come on and talk to me about any cases of female sexual abuse you might have. Well, at that point I only had maybe 10 or 11 or 12, I can't remember. So I went on this program and I talked about women abusing, and it opened up a floodgate. We had tons of telephone calls into the program from adults who thought they were the only ones. And then by the time I got back to my office, we had even more. And it kind of was a snowball effect. It was like when we first started talking about sexual abuse at all, when the adults would say, I never knew it happened to anybody else. I didn't know that, my dad or my uncle or somebody abused me. I didn't know anybody else did this. Same thing was happening with women. It was men and women ringing, saying, I was abused by my mother, by my aunt, by a nun, by a teacher, by, all kinds of different people. I was shocked. I don't expect women to sexually abuse. I really, really thought it was a tiny, tiny problem. At one point after this morning program, ages ago, and again in the 90s, we talked about it on that program, and they had 1,000 phone calls. They had 1,000 phone calls in one day. They couldn't even cope with them all. And that happened, and the reason I say that is because that was morning television from people who happened to be listening, who managed to call in. The 800 cases I've got, I'm just one person. We're not a big organization. We don't have a huge profile. These are the people who've managed to get to me. Therefore, I think that there are a lot more out there. We had a conference about this eventually in, I think, 94, maybe earlier. 400 people applied to come to this conference. It was a huge conference. But 30 people, between 20 and 30 people came, dotted themselves in the audience, and tried to disrupt it. They were yelling that, why was I paying attention to women? It wasn't women. I was taking the attention away from men. One of the women who was going to talk about her own abuse, who was now helping others, then couldn't face the audience. So you had this uproar. You had people in the audience turning on these women who were standing up saying, sit down, we want to hear about this. And you had them shouting, and it was absolutely strange. And very sad, because it was like, don't tell me this information, even if it's true, because I don't want to hear it. And if those women who came along to our conference had had anything to do about it, nobody else would have ever talked about it. It would have just gone away.